My name is Dana Linden, and I'm the Digital Media Specialist here at the Elyria Police Department. We're here today to provide an update of the July 23rd officer-involved shooting and homicide in the city of Lorain. Chief James Walsh will provide opening remarks, followed by Captain Bill Lance, who will give a status of the investigation. All of the information presented today will be available for download using the QR code on the handout provided over on the back table. Chief Walsh.
Good morning. On July 23rd, 2025, our community was shaken by a senseless and violent act. The tragic loss of Lorain Police Officer Philip Wagner, who was ambushed and fatally shot in the line of duty by 28-year-old Michael Parker of Lorain, Ohio. We continue to hold Officer Wagner's family in our hearts and prayers during this difficult time. Lorain Police Officers Brent Payne and Peter Gale were also injured while bravely confronting the threat posed by Parker. We will continue to support them as they recover. When I spoke with many of you on Riverbend Drive that tragic day, I made a promise that the Elyria Police Department, along with our law enforcement partners, would conduct a thorough and impartial investigation and keep the public informed. Today, I stand before you to honor that promise and provide you with an update of our findings. There is no doubt that Officer Wagner's ultimate sacrifice, along with the swift and courageous response of Lorain Police, saved lives. Responding officers engaged Michael Parker and returned fire. During the exchange, Parker sustained a fatal gunshot wound. Our investigation has uncovered a chilling reality. Parker acted alone, and he was armed with a significant cache of weaponry, ammunition, and explosives. The evidence confirms that Parker had a deliberate and evil plan to inflict mass casualties upon humanity. Thanks to the heroic actions of Lorain police officers, a far greater tragedy was averted that day. I want to express my deepest gratitude to the investigative team led by Elyria Police Captain Bill Lance and Elyria Police Detective Bureau. Your tireless work has been essential in uncovering the truth. I also want to acknowledge our investigative partners, Lorain County Sheriff Jack Hall and his deputies, the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation in Cleveland Division, led by Special Agent in Charge Greg Nelson and Assistant Special Agent in Charge Ryan Presley. Your collaboration and dedication has been invaluable through the course of this investigation. To our media partners, thank you for your patience as we work through the details of this complex investigation. And to the citizens of Lorain, Ohio and surrounding communities, thank you for your support, your resilience, and your unwavering respect for those who serve and protect. Finally, I'd like to recognize Mayor Jack Bradley, Chief Michael Failing, and the City of Lorain Police Department. The bravery, professionalism, and commitment shown by your officers in the face of a deadly and unpredictable threat was truly extraordinary, and a powerful testament to the courage and dedication of our law enforcement community. At this time, I'd like to invite Captain Bill Lance, Elyria Police Department, to the podium to share specific details of the investigation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Walsh. Good morning, everyone. I'm Captain Bill Lance of the Elyria Police Department Investigative Division, and I'm the lead investigator on this investigation. Before I begin today's briefing and providing that update on the investigative status and progress of this case, I want to first extend my appreciation to the Lorain County Sheriff's Office, their Detective Bureau specifically, that assisted us with gathering evidence relevant to this case and being there from day one. Specifically want to point out and recognize the technicians from the Lorain County Bomb Squad, as well as the federal partners that assisted with the materials that were discovered that particular day and their professionalism. Also would like to recognize the Ohio BCI Bureau of Criminal Investigation, who assisted us in the collection and processing and analyzing evidence relevant to this case. To our federal partners at the FBI, we appreciate your assistance, your expertise, and it has been critical throughout the investigation. Lastly, I too would like to thank my investigative team for their role, the many hard hours in reviewing the evidence, in investigating this incident. As we continue our investigation into the tragic events on that date, it's important to understand that we see this as a two-pronged investigation. The first investigation is into the homicide of Officer Wagner and that on-duty death. Additionally would be the attempted murder of several additional officers that were present at the scene. The second prong of this investigation is the officer-involved shooting aspect, which occurred during the armed engagement with the suspect, Michael Parker. The goal of the homicide investigation is to answer those critical questions that still remain. While we know when this occurred, where this occurred, and who's responsible, we want to namely understand the why. We are continuing to work to understand the suspect's plan, the suspect's motive, identify the intended targets, and again, we are still continuing to investigate to determine whether this individual acted alone or was influenced or assisted by others. As she well shared with you, and as we get to the presentation, you'll hear that at this point in the investigation, we believe that the suspect acted alone, and we have no evidence of any assistance at this point. It's all these questions that are at the center of our ongoing investigation efforts. Regarding the officer-involved shooting, at the conclusion of the investigation, all evidence will be presented to the Lorain County Prosecutor's Office for review in accordance with standard protocol for all incidents involving the use of deadly force by law enforcement personnel. I want to share that this has been a complex and challenging case, and we remain fully committed to conducting a thorough and objective investigation to determine the full scope of what occurred that day. The investigation included the collection of body-worn camera footage, in-car camera footage, other surveillance footage, radio traffic, physical evidence collected from the scene and from other scenes, statements from the involved officers, and forensic analysis of evidence collected. Today we will share with you what we presently know based upon the evidence, the suspect's capabilities, and the threat level that were faced by officers on July 23rd, 2025. I want to provide the caveat that this is the information as we best know it today, and as the investigation progresses, that information is subject to change. So again, just to quickly recap, on July 23rd, 2025, at approximately 1:05 p.m., an officer-involved shooting occurred in the city of Lorain, Ohio, at the dead end of Riverbend Drive, commonly known to the Lorain Police Department personnel as the Missouri Avenue Extension. The incident involved multiple officers and resulted in the on-duty death again of Officer Philip Wagner and gunshot injuries to Officers Peter Gale and Officers Brent Payne. The suspect, Michael Parker, was shot and killed by responding officers at the scene, and the investigation into the matter was conducted again in joint effort by the Elyria Police Department, Lorain County Sheriff's Office, and Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation. Today we will share with you some of the details again of what we presently know based upon the evidence as well as we're going to provide you with a timeline of key events and activities. And our goal is to be factual and transparent. I want to first start off by describing the area where this incident occurred. Riverbend Drive, Lorain, Ohio. On the screen, I want you to note a zoomed out view, but essentially in northern Lorain, Ohio, at the intersection of Colorado Avenue and Missouri Avenue, if you head southbound down that road would be Riverbend Drive, displayed on the left side of the screen. And then on the right side is a zoomed in image of the area where this shooting occurred and where officers ultimately ended up responding and engaging the suspect. What I want to point out and what I want to really note is you can see on the left image over here, you got the Black River. The road pretty much is a dead end. There's no other area or no other way of accessing that area except by driving down the road or getting out on foot and going through the trees. What we learned during our investigation is the Riverbend Drive in Lorain is generally considered a quiet cul-de-sac, again off of Colorado Avenue. And that this area is used by walkers and joggers and people to use this recreationally, people walking dogs, using some of the nearby trails. And it's used recreationally because of the scenic views that it provides. Also during our investigation, when speaking with Lorain officers, we determined that this is an area that is commonly used by them to whether stop and eat lunch, write reports, complete paperwork, as was the case on July 23rd, 2025. An update is it was initially suspected that the suspect was there and lying in wait. That he was at the scene ahead of time prior to officers, he was staged with his firearms and waiting. And after reviewing all the available evidence to us, what we determined is that's not the case, that officers were there first. We know in reviewing the evidence that Officer Gale, after picking up a pizza at the local Marco's Pizza, ended up traveling down to the scene and arrived there at 12:46 p.m. Officer Wagner arrived a few minutes later at 12:52 and pulled up directly next to Officer Gale. So next I'm going to kind of walk you through the timeline of how this event played out. And then at some point we'll share some videos. We have some in-car camera footage that we're going to share. We have some body-worn camera footage that we're going to share. And then we're going to share some scene photographs so that you guys have a true understanding of, again, what those officers went through and what the scene evidence tells us. So these are images that we created. Obviously, to give context, we didn't have anything else that we could share to provide this context. So on Wednesday, July 23rd, again at 1:03, we have both officers, Philip Wagner in the black SUV, and Officer Peter Gale by the blue and white vehicle, parked at the end of Riverbend Drive, down in the southeast corner of that cul-de-sac. They're eating their lunch, again eating that pizza, having conversation. And at 1:03, while both suspects are still eating lunch, a suspect arrived in the area in the vehicle that is registered to the suspect and immediately began firing upon Officer Wagner's cruiser. During that gunfire, Officer Wagner was struck and incapacitated. Few seconds as that initial barrage of incoming fire comes in, Officer Gale flees that barrage of gunfire, starts heading north on Riverbend Drive, radios into dispatch and reports the shots fired. And that is letting the other officers know what's going on over there. Officer Gale continued northbound. He eventually turned around, staged and waited for his backup. Over the next 3 to 3.5 minutes, from 1:04 to 1:07 p.m., the suspect utilized this opportunity to begin preparing for what he believed to be the subsequent law enforcement response. The suspect ended up repositioning his vehicle. You can see to that little gravel area on the south end of the cul-de-sac. The suspect backed his vehicle in and began pulling equipment out of his vehicle and staging it around his vehicle that you'll see here shortly in a few slides. What I want to share is, while staging, the suspect ultimately moved several rifles on both the driver's side and passenger side of his vehicle, and those rifles were pointed towards the only direction that law enforcement officers would be responding from. Hearing Officer Gale's radio traffic, Officer Brent Payne, as well as several additional officers, began responding to the scene. As Officer Brent Payne turned onto Riverbend Drive, he was able to link up with Officer Gale, and both officers approached the area of the reported shooting. At 1:07 and 42 seconds, Officers Payne and Gale round that corner and they observed the suspect vehicle in the distance. This image gives you an idea of what the scene looked like as Officers Brett Payne and Gale arrived initially back at the scene. This is a screenshot of the dash camera from Officer Payne's vehicle. As he's pulling up, and before the first shot's fired, Officer Gale radios that the suspect is armed with a rifle. He identifies it's that silver vehicle right there that you can see in the distance. And then within seconds, on the in-car camera footage, Brett Payne's cruiser, the windshield, starts getting struck and impacted with gunfire. You will see it in the videos that we're going to provide, the multiple impacts to the front windshield in rapid succession. So at this point, I'm going to transition to Officer Brent Payne's in-car camera footage. I want you guys to know that there's no audio on the actual footage. We will provide you guys an unedited copy of that. For the purposes of today's presentation, we felt that it gave a lot more context by dubbing in the audio from Brent Payne's body-worn camera footage. So again, when you get that video back at your agency, you're going to have the unedited copy as well as the copy that we put together. I think it provides more context as far as what the suspect is doing and what the officers are doing and what they're experiencing. Again, this is Officer Brett Payne's cruiser. He just turned onto Riverbend Drive. He said he's southbound on Riverbend Drive.
I'm coming in here. Where should I not go?
Officer Gale's vehicle in front of him. See the suspect vehicle in the distance. All right, I'm gonna stop it right there. We'll pick it back up here in a second. So what did we see there? What did we hear? We heard silver vehicle right there. It says silver vehicle. That's Officer Gale telling Officer Payne it's that vehicle down there. Officer Gale's radio says he's got a rifle. He's got a rifle. And what you're not going to see is Officer Gale's vehicle parked, pulled up next to his and slightly behind, is backing up and repositioning as he's relaying this information. Both officers at this point and their cruisers over the next several seconds are struck by the incoming rifle fire. In that initial volley that you heard, the suspect fired approximately 25 to 30 rounds at the officers and their cruisers. Officer Gale backs up. I don't know if you heard it and I can play it again, but Officer Gale backs up. He's trying to get Officer Payne in his vehicle, which you'll see when we play Officer Payne's body camera footage. He's trying to get him in the car, got the incoming shots, that initial volley of 25 to 30 shots. While Officer Gale is trying to get Officer Payne to get into the vehicle, the suspect starts shooting directly into the side of Officer Gale's vehicle. Officer Gale gets struck in the hand by gunfire, and fortunately he's able to drive himself out of that barrage of gunfire. As he's heading northbound, he's radioing active shooter over the radio. Officer Gale continues north to what essentially ended up being the staging area as officers were arriving in the area, and ultimately the command post was established up in that area. He met up with other officers and he's transported away from the scene. What you're going to see when we play Officer Brent Payne's body camera footage is he's able to, he gets out of his vehicle, he starts to maneuver towards the back of his cruiser. His intent was to retrieve his patrol rifle. Never got the chance. While he is attempting to move away from his vehicle after he starts receiving incoming gunfire, he starts to move on foot north and east towards a wood line. What you'll see is the suspect fires an additional volley of approximately 30 rounds at both Officer Gale, his vehicle, striking his vehicle and shattering the back window, and Officer Payne as he continued to maneuver towards the wood line. Officer Payne did briefly return fire. He got a couple shots off with his service weapon. As he got closer to the wood line, he fell in the grass, and ultimately he was struck both in the hip and in the lower arm. Despite his wounds, he was able to crawl into the wood line and radio for other officers for assistance. In the footage that we share with you today, obviously, we're going to provide as much as we comfortably can, being respectful to that situation. So what you will see is Officer Payne arriving in the area, some of that radio traffic again, him maneuvering out of his vehicle, behind his vehicle, and then as he's trying to maneuver towards the wood line, the suspect continuing to engage him in gunfire. So as Officer Gale is struck by, after he's struck by the gunfire and he is heading back northbound, another SUV pulls up to the scene. And that vehicle included Detective Shoemaker and Rodriguez, as well as Special Agent Thompson of the FBI. As they arrived in the area and we spoke with them, they observed and heard incoming gunfire and rounds striking the ground, traveling through the trees. This group of personnel fortunately was able to maneuver their SUV over to the area where Brent Payne had radioed that he had went down. Brent Payne did a phenomenal job with sharing enough information and guiding the responding officers, detectives, to his location. At that location, these personnel fortunately were able to provide immediate medical aid by putting a tourniquet on him, likely saving his life. They're there for a few minutes. As you can see up on the screen, it says 110 to 113. So they're there for a period of time trying to provide that medical aid, but then also look for that opportunity to safely extract Officer Brent Payne from the wood line. Unfortunately, they're able to do that. They load him up in the back of this SUV and they transport him to Mercy Hospital. Next, I'm going to play Officer Brent Payne's body camera footage. This again will describe, or will depict and show him arriving at the scene, him maneuvering back towards his vehicle, and the suspect immediately firing upon both him and Officer Gale. You'll see Officer Gale's in the vehicle in behind him after he falls to the ground and gets back to his feet. You'll see Officer Payne attempt to maneuver around Officer Gale's vehicle, and then Officer Gale's vehicle, it's at that point that his vehicle starts to get struck by gunfire. He gets struck himself, and he departs the area, and then you'll see Officer Payne continue towards the wood line, and that's where the video will stop.
I'm coming in here. Where should I not go?
So what do we see there? We heard again on the traffic coming over on the body camera from the radio. Officer Gale reporting that silver vehicle right there. Stop right there. As Brent Payne attempts to get out of his cruiser, Officer Gale informs him he has a rifle. He has a rifle. Brent Payne is already reacting to that. He's already maneuvering towards the back of his vehicle. You see Officer Payne go to the ground several times. In our interview with him, he talked about falling to the ground, but he was not struck by gunfire at that moment. He was trying to get to cover, get to a position of cover. You see Officer Payne discharge his service weapon in response to the deadly threat that is posed to him. He described his efforts more so as suppressive in nature, just so that he could move. You see a maneuver around Officer Gale's vehicle, and then Officer Gale again gets struck during that period. And we're not going to share that footage, but he departs the area, and then we know the other detectives in the SUV are arriving right as Gale is departing. Payne gets into the wood line shortly after this. For the next 15 seconds at least, the suspect continues firing upon Officer Brent Payne's position, trying to strike him. Payne does an extraordinary job of, in that moment, under that stress, relaying his position and providing updates and information so that officers can get in there. Also noted was Brett Payne's communications during the incident. So while they're tending to him and providing medical care, he is still directing activities of other people. Before they pull him out, he's looking out for his fellow officers, saying, do we have cover before you pull me out? Do we have cover? They're like, we got it covered. Another officer, he sees a cruiser rolling past, and again, he's been shot. He's bleeding profusely. And as the other officer passes him, he shares, let him know he's rolling into it, have him stop right there. And that information goes over the radio. He's still, while he's not an active participant, he's doing his role as a leader within their organization. So during the period where the detectives and Special Agent Thompson were working to extract Brett Payne from the wood line, you have your first vehicle pulling up to the scene. So up here at the top of the screen, again, now you have Brett Payne's cruiser, and you have a vehicle that includes Lieutenant Matisek, Detectives Hartman and Sanchez, and Lieutenant Ball, all of the Lorain Police Department, pull up in that vehicle. They dismount their vehicle and they begin taking positions of cover, using Brett Payne's cruiser for cover. Following right behind them is another SUV that includes Detective Craig Payne and Sergeant Vrooman. They dismount their vehicle and maneuver up close and take a position of cover. Officers observed the suspect near his vehicle firing upon them. And in response to that deadly threat, the officers discharged their service weapons at the suspect, ultimately striking and killing him, thus neutralizing the deadly threat. The first shot fired by Lorain officers is at 1:11 and 11 seconds p.m. Multiple officers began to advance on the suspect's position, and we'll show that to you when we jump back into the dash camera footage. The last shot fired by officers was at 1:12 and 30 seconds. So here you see the suspect's vehicle backed into that gravel area. On the right side of the screen at 1:19, just before 1:20, you have a tactical team or an approach team approaching the suspect, determined that the suspect was deceased, and they begin taking action to secure the scene. These personnel initially, when they got up there, took cover behind an electrical box that provided some cover, and they conducted an assessment. They continued to hold security with other officers at the scene as other officers were attempting to focus their efforts on extracting Officer Wagner from his cruiser, providing medical aid, and getting him evacuated out of that area. Now I'm going to transition back to Officer Brett Payne's in-car camera footage, and we'll walk through that a little bit more. So at this point, try to focus your attention to the upper left-hand screen. The suspect, you will see the suspect moving about his vehicle. Okay, that's the initial 2 volleys of shots fired by the suspect. You will now see the suspect moving about his vehicle. He begins staging items around the vehicle. So you'll see him move both on the passenger side, driver's side. You'll also see the suspect at some point open the trunk, close the trunk, open the trunk, close the trunk. Now he's on the passenger side. Close the trunk, open trunk, close trunk. Pulls a cart over to the passenger side, and we'll show you that cart that he pulled over there here when we share some scene photographs. So what do we know that's going on right now? Right now, there's the light, or the extraction efforts, the rescue efforts on Officer Brent Payne. We were very fortunate as a community that the suspect took this lull and began staging and setting up for whatever plan he had, and that the officers were, during that period, safely able to get over to Officer Payne and extract him while the suspect began staging, continuing the staging. I apologize, there's not a timestamp on this. Here in a second, you're going to start seeing the screen shake, and you'll see glass falling from the bullet holes onto the dash. That is your indication that officers are now, the officers that I described, are now returning fire at the suspect. It's during that period that they're utilizing the vehicle as a position of cover and engaging the suspect in the distance. Here you can see it right here, glass falling from the gunshots. Officers are returning fire. If you look on the small screen, you'll see bullet impacts in the grass. Suspect is on the driver's side of the vehicle, probably about 10 to 15 feet away. See the bullet impact into the ground. Another bullet impact into the ground. And then here shortly on the left side of your screen, you're going to see Detective Craig Payne. Right there. Followed by Sergeant Grumman. And while they were advancing, this other Lieutenant Manasek and the other officers were engaging from behind the cruiser. And now that was Lieutenant Manasek, Detective Sanchez on the right side of your screen. And they're advancing towards the suspect. Lieutenant Ball and Detective Hartman in the white shirt behind him are now advancing. You can see on the right side in the shadows over here, right here, I'm going to back it up just so that you can see it one more time. This is Lieutenant Manasek. He takes a knee, ends up engaging the suspect from this area as well. And then they continue to advance towards the suspect's position. And again, that leads to this image right here, where ultimately they approach and determine that the suspect is deceased, and they begin securing the area. At the same time that they're again dealing with the suspect, officers located Officer Wagner in his cruiser. He was extracted and emergency aid was administered, and he was transported by police cruiser to Mercy Hospital. Due to the severity of the incident, Lorain Police Department requested mutual aid, and numerous law enforcement agencies and their tactical teams responded and conducted a coordinated search of the surrounding areas to confirm that there was no immediate or ongoing threat to the public safety. Once the scene was secured, it was handed off to us to conduct the investigation. Lorain police officers were very alert. They realized what they just encountered with this armed individual and had concerns that the suspect might have had additional motives. And in looking into the vehicle, they observed baggage that caused concern, and they requested Lorain County Bomb Squad respond to the scene. And during their assessment of the vehicle, they ended up locating approximately 100 pounds of tannerite, an explosive material, inside 2 separate containers in the back seat of the vehicle. We were very fortunate that day that they were able to safely extract those materials and conduct a controlled detonation well away from the scene. Officer Wagner succumbed to his injuries the following day on July 24th. So next we're going to share some information about the scene itself. We want to provide an overview of what the scene and what the recovered evidence tells us about the suspect's capabilities and the threat level officers faced on that date. What we can share is the suspect was heavily armed. The suspect had a total of 10 firearms that were all purchased by the suspect that we confirmed, that were recovered at the scene. 7 of which were rifles. 5 of those 7 had magnification or optics, a scope on top of them, which indicated the suspect's intent to engage from distance and with precision. Additionally, we located 1 shotgun and 2 handguns. This is looking south. So you're standing at the north end of the cul-de-sac and looking south, and off to the left you have Officer Wagner's vehicle. In the middle and at the end of the cul-de-sac, the suspect's Toyota is parked in back there. This is an overhead view captured from one of our drones at the scene, the date of the incident. And we highlighted the rifles that are staged around the suspect's vehicle. But additionally, you can see all the other equipment that the suspects began staging. And I'll talk more about that as the presentation continues. Based upon the spent casings located at the scene, we were able to confirm that the suspect fired at least 103 times, primarily using the rifle platform. Also, we recovered 294 loaded magazines containing various types of rifle ammunition. This, combined with several containers of loose ammunition rounds inside the vehicle, would place a conservative estimate at the suspect total ammunition count at well over 7,500 rounds. That's a significant amount of ammunition. This volume and types of weapons, the ammunition, and the explosive material, they paint a very clear picture that this suspect was heavily armed and he came prepared for a violent and sustained confrontation with law enforcement. Shown here are the bags that contain the magazines that I'm about to show you around the suspect's vehicle. In those bags, when you open them up, you can see all the rifle magazines. When we pull them out, this isn't even all of them. This is just to give you an idea of the volume and the preparation that goes into loading each one of these magazines bullet by bullet, taping them together. It speaks for itself as far as the preparation. Some additional scene photographs. Some things that stand out. The cooler, the beverages. We've already hit on the weapons. Suspect had some type of plan for this to be a sustained contact to the point that he was going to need to rehydrate. The hearing protection utilized by the suspect while he's engaging officers. From this angle, you see the cart that I referenced earlier in the in-car camera footage. And all we can take from this is the suspect had at some point some type of plan to add mobility. The cart could be used to transport those bags of ammunition. Those are not light, those are heavy. Could be used to hang the firearms off of. But we know that this is indicative that the suspect at some point had some type of plan to add mobility to this situation. Inside the vehicle, AR style rifle as well as a shotgun. Each one of those placards is a rifle casing fired by the suspect, and in this area near the suspect's vehicle on the driver's side, a total of 84 spent casings fired by the suspect. Other rifles collected at the scene. The two on the one on the upper left and on the bottom were closest to the suspect on the driver's side of the grass area in that photo that you observed. Additional firearms collected at the scene. The one on the top and on the left were on the passenger side of the vehicle on the ground. This was found on the passenger side, the lower right-hand corner with the handgun, passenger side in a bag. As well as another loaded handgun in the center console area. Another rifle near the driver's side rear in a box. Also in scene one, you see Officer Wagner's vehicle at the top of the screen. And this was an image that was captured by our drone, and then using the thermal aspect, we kind of superimposed this image just so that you can see the suspect fired 19 rifle casings in this area near the center of the cul-de-sac. That correlated to the rifle round impacts on the passenger side of Officer Wagner's vehicle. It matched the evidence over there. So we're going to move on to scene two. So scene one was the furthest southern end of the cul-de-sac. Scene two is the area where Officer Payne's vehicle was, and where Lieutenant Manasek and then subsequently Detective Craig Payne engaged the suspect initially. There you have Brett Payne's cruiser, Lieutenant Manasek's SUV, and again, this was the area where officers ended up returning fire at the subject. We collected casings from this area. Just to point out, this utility pole right here is 145 meters or 476 feet from where the suspect was positioned. In this area, we located a total of 47 spent casings. The casings matched the brand known to be utilized by Lorain police officers, and the casings consisted of both rifle and handgun ammunition. Provided this image just so that you can, again, see the bullet impacts from a different location. Just wanted you to note the bullet impacts on the windshield, on the hood. A close-up. And we'll talk about scene 3. Scene 3 consisted of just Officer Gale's vehicle. So after he headed up to the staging area, he was transported away from the scene. BCI ended up collecting and processing his vehicle that was struck multiple times. Right here on the driver's side, or on the driver's door, you can note the multiple bullet impacts directly right where Officer Gale would have been. Back windows shot out. So we ended up conducting interviews with officers. I'm not going to provide specific details, but I'll do kind of a collective overview of what we ended up determining from those interviews. Officers reported hearing the radio traffic. Some heard the report of shots fired. Others heard, depending on when they got involved in the incident, an active shooter. Others heard officers down. Some of them heard all of that. Responding officers encountered an active shooter armed with a high-powered rifle. The suspect was observed in a shooter stance, aiming and firing at officers. Some officers reported seeing the muzzle flash, or hearing the gunfire, or observing rounds striking around them. Officers had knowledge that the suspect had already struck other officers with gunfire. The suspect continued to reposition, reload, remain engaged, showing an intent to continue to inflict deadly harm. One officer specifically recalled the suspect wearing the hearing protection that you observed. Officers recognized the suspect's actions as an immediate and ongoing deadly threat to human life. And in response to this deadly threat, in defense of their lives of fellow officers, 5 officers discharged their service weapons at the suspect. Gunfire was directed towards the suspect until the suspect was no longer an active threat. And it also has to be noted that several additional personnel, while at the scene, did not fire because they were focused on either extraction or rescue or other operations. So a little bit about the suspect, Michael Parker. We know he's 28. We know he was 28 years old at the time of the incident. He lived at the time in Lorain, Ohio. Been a lifelong resident of Lorain, Ohio. He was unemployed at the time of the shooting. In line with some of the physical evidence that we recovered, and in addition to some interviews that we've conducted with people who knew the suspect or were familiar with the suspect, they described him having a fascination with firearms. Some people described him as being quiet and that he kept to himself. And what we know is he had limited law enforcement contact that was mainly traffic-related matters, whether it be a crash or traffic stops. Let's talk a little bit about motive. As part of the investigation, we have reviewed the prior contacts between law enforcement in an effort to better understand what the suspect's possible motive is. We're aware of the motor vehicle crash that occurred in the city of Lorain, where Officer Wagner subsequently issued the suspect a citation as a result of that motor vehicle crash investigation. The crash occurred October 23rd, 2022. That case was resolved in Lorain Municipal Court on May 4th, with Parker ultimately entering a plea of no contest to a left of center violation, and the separate charge of leaving the scene of an accident was dismissed. Following that, because that tied into a crash, the other motorist involved in that crash filed a separate civil suit in Lorain County Common Pleas Court on February 6, 2023, and that was settled out of court on March of 2024. While that information provides a little bit of background context, I just want to be clear that we have not uncovered any evidence during this stage of the investigation that identifies that any specific individual, to include Officer Wagner or Officer Gale, or an intended target. Furthermore, again, all available evidence points that Michael Parker acted alone in his armed attack on law enforcement. Based on the evidence recovered so far, it's clear that Michael Parker did have a plan. And while that plan has not been uncovered through a note or through a manifesto, the evidence and the capabilities show us that he had something planned. And that the extent of the plan is still under investigation, but what we do know is this was not a spontaneous act. We know Parker's firearm history dates as far back as 2019, as far as the firearms that were present at the scene. That purchase history for all of those firearms began in 2021. What we know between March and July of 2025, the suspect acquired 4 additional firearms during that time period. They were all located at the scene, loaded and ready to use. In addition to his firearms, again, he had been steadily acquiring large amounts of ammunition and other tactical equipment over the previous months, including the materials that were used to carry out the attack. The volume of ammunition, again estimated at more than 7,500 rounds, the presence of 294 loaded magazines, 100 pounds of tannerite suggest a level of preparation that goes far beyond any type of typical ownership. Planning and intent, we included this, and I kind of already hit on it. But just to recap, plan of some type of plan or intent of going mobile at some point, and the beverages. This is going to be planning on being out there for a while. The mobility aspect of this is extremely concerning. Had the suspect gone mobile and maneuvered into another position or into the wood line, this could have been a very, very tragic situation. And again, the responding officers and their initial intervention and subsequent neutralization of that threat saved a lot of lives that day. So the next steps, through our partners with the FBI, we continue to examine digital evidence and other materials recovered both from at the scene and at the suspect's residence, where we're still awaiting the results of those examinations. Our goal is to gain a fuller understanding of the suspect's intent planning process to determine, again, whether he acted alone or was influenced or assisted by others. Again, as the officer involved shooting, that aspect of the case will be formally presented to the Lorain County prosecutor. That's going to conclude my block. Again, we will open it up for a few questions at the end. Again, when we get to that point, I just ask and remind you that this is an open and active investigation. With that, we shared as much as we felt comfortable without compromising that investigation, but we will try to field a couple questions to see if we can answer those as well. I'm going to invite Dr. Frank Miller, he's the Lorain County Coroner's Office, up to the podium so that he can provide a little bit more information regarding the suspect, Michael Parker.
Good morning. I want to commend this investigation and this presentation. This is excellent work by my partners. And I always have excellent cooperation from Lorain County law enforcement. I appreciate that. Michael Parker died from multiple gunshot wounds. So his cause of death is multiple gunshot wounds because he shot by another person. His death is also ruled homicide. His toxicology report showed no alcohol, no illicit drugs, and no medications. So of the about 300 things that we look for, nothing was found in his toxicology. And his medical history is not real known for the last 8 or 9 years. But in the past, about 12 or 13 years ago, he has had issues with a thought disorder. He's been diagnosed as schizophrenic in the past. He's been diagnosed as having a psychotic disorder or illogical thinking in the past. He was on medicine. I have found no available evidence that he's been on medicine for at least 8 or 9 years. And we don't know much about his health in the near term, in the last few years, but in the past he was known and hospitalized to have a thought disorder, and he's been called paranoid schizophrenic or having a psychotic disorder in the past. None of that is after 2016.
Thank you.
I want to invite Chief Michael Failing from Lorain Police to say a few words, and then we will open it up to some questions.
Thank you all for coming. I just want to take a moment to thank the Elyria Police Department, the Ohio Investigative Unit, the FBI, and Lorain County Sheriff's Office for their tireless work on this complex investigation. Your dedication and professionalism has been invaluable. I also want to extend my gratitude to the numerous police departments that responded to the scene that day and those who continue to assist us in the days following. The cooperation and support we received was overwhelming and reminded us of the strength of the law enforcement family.